Today on Brick House, reef hooks. Scare the hell out of those pirates? Scuppers to drain the deck. Years ago, people would ask, Patrick, would you ever go sail around the world again? And I would say, no, not really. I didn't have the enthusiasm to. I had enough adventures. I didn't need any more. In fact, even my enthusiasm for sailing was waning. I had done a lot of boat deliveries between New England and the Caribbean. And the only exception to that world cruising idea would have been if I had met the right lady, if she just happened to come along, who had the sailing skills, and she was the motivator and didn't mind dragging me along. I would not be the motivator at all on a world trip or any kind of cruising. In fact, all the boat deliveries that I did, even the enthusiasm for that was waning, and I only had one more trip in me. And I used to do a lot of work for OPO, Offshore Passage Opportunities, which is a crew networking organization, and they also have a what they call a swan sailing program. That's where crew would sign up to sail on a swan sailboat, whether it's a 46, 48, 52 or whatever, from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda to St. Martin, so that they could get offshore sailing experience with an experienced captain before taking their own families offshore. So I had it in my head I would do one more trip. And we left Rhode Island and had one of the stormiest passages you can imagine. It was a lot of fun. The crew was fantastic. And that's the trip that Rebecca had signed up for. Hank Schmidt, always the owner of OPO, always put the women on my boat trying to keep my motivation up, which it helped. But I had a lady friend for 5 years. She was the sweetest person in the whole world, and I was not looking. But at the end of that stormy passage, and once we got down to St. Martin, there was a little connection between Rebecca and myself. But 2 more years went by, and we finally got together. And it turned out, not only was she good looking and a good sailor, this was her boat, the Valiant 40. I couldn't pass up that deal. So Rebecca has been dragging me across oceans ever since. I mean, we first met, God, how long ago was that? We've been on this boat now for 12 years. It's 2018 right now. That's almost going on 15 years that we first met. Amazing how time goes by when you're out cruising and having fun with the right person. So let's get on to the how to do it videos. Come on over and take a look at this reefing hook. This part of the sail is called the dog bone. And these are the dog bone rings for reefing purposes. I like to use 2 rings on the reefing hook because it holds the tack of the sail closer to the boom, and it just gives me a little better shape. I don't think it really matters. I could go with just 1 ring, but it raises it much higher. But the problem had always been I would have to hold on to these rings, try to raise the sail with my left hand, then all of a sudden the lurch of the boat makes me drop my hand from these rings because I have to hang on to the mast and continue to hoist the sail, and the whole time these things are falling off. And I'm right back to where I started. If I'm lucky, just 1 ring stays on and I can go ahead and hoist, and I just let it go at that. So I finally took a spear gun head like this one, ground down the rivet that holds the 2 barbs on to free up the barbs, and then I came back to the reef hook and ground flat spots in the reef hook so I could attach the barb and use a stainless steel rivet to hold the barb on. So now it's impossible for these dog bone rings to come off. I can use 1, I can use 2, and no problem. So what's nice about this is that now when I go in to put a second reef, this will not come off. It'll always be ready to use in the first reef position. So let me show you this starboard side and how I set up then the second reef. So here we are on the starboard side of the gooseneck. I don't have a solid reef hook on the starboard side that would fit underneath this bolt like we have on the port side. because you have specific port side and starboard side reef hooks. You can't swap them, and I haven't come across a starboard side reef hook yet that I can modify and mount underneath this bolt. If I took the port side reef hook and put it over here, it would smash up against the mast. So on this side, I just have a carabiner that's been tied on to the gooseneck, and I use this for the number 2 reef. I don't like this system so much because it wobbles around way too much. It allows the tack of the reef to come out in a direction I don't really care for, but it is adequate enough for the number 2 reef. Certainly there's other ways of securing the dog bone rings, the reef tack, to the gooseneck. So if you care to share some good ideas with everybody, just leave it in the comments down below. This article about pirates accosting Brickhouse first came out in the Australian sailing publication Cruising Helmsman in January 2017. And then it appeared in Bluewater Sailing magazine, the American publication, in May of 2017. And it's about how we were accosted by pirates as Rebecca and I were sailing south in the Gulf of Thailand, about 95 miles to the west of the Vietnam coast. It's a long story. If you can't get a hold of those magazines, you can also go to our blog site, whereisbrickhouse.com, then search for pirate, and it'll come up. You can read all about it. But how we were able to discourage these pirates and stop their approach was to shoot off a flare in their direction. When Rebecca and I were sailing south in the Gulf of Thailand, about 90 some miles west of Vietnam, that is when I shot off one of these Payne Wessex flares. The other Hua-Hee flare was just a malfunctioned dud, even though it was far newer than the Paynes and Wessex. But I held the Payne and Wessex just about maybe 10 degrees above horizontal. I pulled the pin, the safety pin, flipped the lever over, and it shot out. It's amazing how fast of a drop rate the flare had. It only went about maybe 60 feet before it plowed into the seawater. But that loud bang, the smoke that billowed out, and that projectile that flew out even 60 feet was enough to scare those pirates away. They stopped their engine dead. The boat turned off to port away from us, and that was the last of the trouble we had with those guys. So I wanted to see what would happen now, because I've always thought I need to set this up at 45 degrees and see what a kind of trajectory that would give as a ranging method for next time that might happen, and if I have to scare somebody away. So that's what this experiment is all about. So this Hua-Hee flare was manufactured in 2013 and expired in 2016. This experiment was done in 2018. The Paynes and Wessex is far older. It was manufactured in 1993 and expired in 1996. Who would ever expect a 22-year out-of-date flare to ever launch properly? Setting up the cameras, I wanted to make sure that I had full coverage on the launch of these flares. I just really wasn't sure which direction they're going to go, how far they're going to go, if they're going to go anywhere at all. So I set up several different cameras and set those to run at 60 frames per second, with the head-mounted camera on my head running at 30 frames per second. First up was the Hua-Hee flare, only 2 years out of date. You pull the ignition cord, and absolutely nothing. A total dud. This is exactly what happened during the situation with the pirates. I had a Hua-Hee flare then and pulled the cord, and nothing happened. And all the while, these guys are getting closer and closer, and we were just about ready to have a collision. And fortunately, Rebecca was able to get me another flare, a Paynes and Wessex. And at that point, though, we had some distance on these guys, and I was able to shoot off the Paynes and Wessex and scare these guys away. So let's see what happens now with the Paynes and Wessex if we hold it up at a 45-degree angle and shoot it off. I never would have guessed that the flare would have gone that far and that high. Very impressive for a 22-year-old out-of-date flare. I'm not surprised at all that the flare itself underneath the parachute did not ignite. But if it had, and if it had landed on somebody's boat, there's no way in the world they would have put the fire out. When these flares hit the water, they continue to burn for their full duration underwater. If you have one of those little plastic orange Orion flare launchers, don't ever call it a flare pistol because they're very illegal in many foreign countries. But if you ever shoot one of those flare launchers into the water, the same thing, the projectile will continue to burn for its full duration. So you'd never ever want to shoot an intruder on your own boat with one of those because your boat will eventually go up in flames. Hang on to all of your old flares. They're very good protection from the bad guys. When I got involved with Brick House, which was built in 1976, the only drainage on the side decks were one little drain on the port and one small drain on the starboard side of the deck. Hardly enough to get rid of water fast enough when we're out in stormy conditions. I mean, what if there is a leak in any of the bolts holding on the stanchions or a leak at the chain plates? I don't need a pool of water just running over all of these areas causing problems. I want to get all that water off the side deck just as quickly as possible. So we needed to cut scuppers through the tow rail, which was a fairly easy project. We actually had this done in Cartagena, Colombia. And there's a man there named Flavit. If you ever go to Cartagena, look up Flavit and he'll do a great job for you. It was very simple to cut holes through the tow rail, and then he made little plates of fiberglass and glued those in place, and then sealed up all of the exterior joins. The problem is half of them did leak on the inside, just a little drip, but it was extremely difficult to get to those areas. And what I did was able to clean up the joins and then used 3M 5200 all around the joins and the seals where it meets the outside of the hull, and that took care of all the leaks. So I actually patched it up from inside of the boat. So we have 3 scuppers, and that seems like that's enough in number. So we have one here, another one farther aft, back here, and then another one much farther aft, as far back as we could make it. When we're hard on the wind and waves are washing over the side deck, they'll slam all the way back here. Even the scuppers up forward are not enough to drain everything right away. So all that water washes all the way to the very back of the boat on the side deck. It gets caught up in this corner. And before it would just come splashing up and half of it would come into the cockpit. It was a real mess. So we cut this scupper in here, and now a lot of that water, rather than coming into the cockpit, disappears over the side. Every 2 weeks I try to put out a new video on Friday. And next video though, it may not have that much to do with sailing, because Rebecca and I did a real National Geographic experience going way up inland in Tanzania to a national park and did a safari. But also just getting there. It was a grueling 8.5-hour bus ride. And that was not a American Trailways Scenic Cruiser bus. It was a Tanzanian bus, very crowded, very smelly, and it even broke down along the way, which was a good thing because everybody needed a break out in the middle of the highway. So we had a half hour to get off the bus and walk around until they cooled the engine down and got more water in it. But that'll be a fun video to put together. These videos take about 2 to 3 hours of production time for every minute of airtime. So it's a tremendous amount of work. Rebecca doesn't understand why I do it. Sometimes I don't understand myself. It's just something fun to do. Maybe when, or if we ever monetize these videos, then she might get a little more excited about it, and I can understand that. Hey, but thanks a lot for watching. If this video was good for you, please down below click on the thumbs up, and if you haven't done it already, to subscribe. Hey, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon.